Hi, and welcome to our first lecture in this series of Advanced Mental Health Counseling Techniques. And today we're working from your text and reviewing chapters 1, 2, and starting with 9. I'm going to introduce 9, and then I have more videos linked below that I'm asking you to watch on chapter 9 instead of just hearing me ramble on. And if you haven't read the chapters yet, maybe just stop here, go back and read them, and then come back with your hot takes on what's presented. Ideally, I want you to start exploring what your counseling practice looks like or what you want it to look like so that you can develop skills that resonate with that goal in mind. So, this conversation starts at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Chapter 1, Professionalism in Counseling and Psychotherapy. And in this, we'll talk about being rooted in a single theory or developing more of an integrative approach. And then we'll talk a little bit about technical eclecticism in counseling as well. And the reason that this is important when we talk about professionalism is because we do want to be intentional in the way that we approach clients. And of course, we're considering our clients as individuals, but it's important to know and to have some research based and evidence based support for what we're doing so that we know we're meeting our clients' needs in the best way possible. So, in other words, even if you're using an approach that is integrated, you are never going to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. That's not professional, nor is it intentional or evidence based. You, as a professional, must have a foundation and you're rooted in and have a theoretical understanding or underpinnings that you're constantly developing because we're never done learning, right? So, regardless of which route you choose or which theory floats your personal therapeutic boat, this is part of our commitment to professionalism of ethics and counseling. Developing this for yourself might take some time, and internship is a really great place to start this work. You might find in 10 years you change your orientation completely or start over, and that's also okay. Don't feel like picking one now locks you in for the rest of your career. Look at it more of just a tree that you're climbing and you're just picking the first branch to explore and set a foundation. So I'm curious what theories and models you've been exploring and feel connected with now. Maybe you learned about them in a theories class and are now having the opportunity to see them come to life in internship. Maybe you've already been practicing from it before now, too. Which ones stand out to you and why? Which ones don't? Which ones are you trying to avoid like the plague? This is a great place to start. What do you want to know? And maybe more importantly, what don't you want to know? And how do these theories fit with your way of being or your way of understanding clients? Technical eclecticism is the theory that you can combine the most efficient techniques to really tailor treatment towards a client's needs. And this is what it's called, but I personally just hate the word eclectic. I think it often comes with a connotation of disorganization and what I was talking about before of just throwing things at a wall to see what sticks. There's a debate in the counseling community about the use of this word because it can often in practice look like trying any shiny new model and not having much of a home base. Now, I think the word integrated better defines what this concept is trying to get at, which is coming to treatment, individualizing client goals, and using intentional shifts between models to support client goals. So that could be having two or more theories in your back pocket that you're constantly working from or trained in. You understand how they work together and also how they don't work together. And sometimes you might choose a second theory to make up for the limitations of your first theory. So, regardless of the word that you choose to use, eclectic or integrated, please just make sure that what you intend behind it is that you are being thoughtful in your professional shifting between theories instead of having a purse with just too much junk in it. And when you reach your hand in, you just grab the first thing that happens to be at top. And the other side of the coin is whether or not you even do this. Maybe you just stick with one tried and true therapeutic model. And there's a lot to consider here. And I'll say that most contemporary counselors now are integrating, but that doesn't mean that you have to. And again, whether you do or you don't, choose with intention. It has to be an active choice, not a mistake that you accidentally fell into giving clients DBT skills years after practicing psychodynamic theory. Your client is going to get real confused. You're going to get real confused. The goals and the pathway to the destination can get muddled and lost very quickly. Do everything with the intention of helping your client. So there are some different approaches that what are considered eclectic. And we want to make sure that we're aware of our own styles and that we have the training to explore and attempt various styles. And I know I hear this all the time about ethically, we have to work within our scope of practice, but when we're first starting out, our scope is really small. It's okay. We're just starting. What trainings can you go to? What counselors can you observe? What models does your supervisor practice from? Are they a good fit with how you see your counseling identity unfolding? Why or why not? Exploring answers to all those questions will help you broaden your scope. So, if you're using an integrative or eclectic approach, you don't want to just start working with something that you have no familiarity with. You want to make sure that you have some training and some knowledge to back up your approach. So, you can't just watch a TikTok video on EMDR and then say, okay, this is what I'm doing now. That would be unethical and unprofessional and really dangerous. But you can watch TikTok and then go read a couple of articles and then go buy a book and then find a community and then take trainings and then get a supervisor and then get certified. See how that pathway goes? There is a pathway there. And maybe it starts with TikTok, maybe it doesn't, but it just needs to be a pathway towards competency. So, another piece of this that oftentimes counselors describe as being part of an integrative or a collective eclectic approach is the need to sometimes refer out and have multiple types of counselors working with one client. So, if there's a need for a client to have an application of a theory or model or approach that you're not familiar with, your goal isn't trying to be everything for everyone and get trained and master skills in every single model. Goodness, that would just be so overwhelming and again, confusing and would probably muddy the pathway to success, yours and the clients. And who has all that time and money anyway? But the referral process might depend on the setting where you work, on the type of clients that you're treating. Maybe there are some counselors within your practice that you could create a treatment team with. Maybe you have to look for external providers. In my agency, for example, there's nobody certified in EMDR. So when a client requests this, I know I need an outside referral. Also, we don't have any marriage and family therapists. So I can do some family therapy when the goal of it is exploring how to help my identified client. But if they want family therapy, tried and true family therapy, I refer out. And the same goes for your creative art therapists. This is a specialty area that you can certainly explore with your clients, like introducing art materials. But if you're not an art therapist, you can't say that you're doing art therapy. And all of this is meant to protect the client from harm and making sure that you're finding the optimal level of fit in the counseling relationship and treatment plan. And then just another thing to consider about an eclectic approach is that it's not an obligation to use multiple theories with the same client. It might look more like shifting between theoretical models as you work with different clients. So maybe one client, a humanistic approach works really well, and for another client, CBT is going to be more effective. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're crossing or overlapping those things for each client, but it just gives you the freedom to shift between models that fit for both you and the client really well. So, along with this debate about whether or not we're adhering to one theory or using more of an integrative approach, there's also this discussion about really what even is counseling theory and how is it governed? Is it a theory? Is it a philosophy? Or is it more of a conceptual model? Our text talks about some of the differences between theory and philosophy, or just really how we approach counseling, and it refers to this as the theoretical aura. So, this might feel a little different than the rest of our lecture today because I think it really digs into that way of being of how we are and how we understand ourselves in our practice versus techniques or way of intervening or way of understanding a theory or conceptualizing a client. It doesn't mean that one theory, model, whatever you want to call it, is necessarily right or wrong or more correct than another. It just might depend on your approach to counseling. So, how does it fit for you? So we're just thinking about just the differences between theory, philosophy, and a conceptual model. And when we think about who we are as counselors, it can help us refine our approach and better understand what it is that we're bringing to our counseling relationships and how we're approaching the field in general. And what is your it factor? And so I'm curious how each of you are interpreting this concept of theoretical aura. I think it's kind of a cool term, like what color is your counseling energy? But how are you defining your way of being and your approach with clients? It's important that we're using these researched and evidence based practices so that it's not like we're forging new territory or making up new theoretical models. We don't want our clients to be guinea pigs who are being experimented on, but rather we're meeting them with interventions that have been proven to work. We use these models that have been tested, or we're building an integrative approach because it's important to link research to our practice. And how can we measure the effectiveness of a therapeutic intervention? Another piece to that too is that it gives more consistency and more efficacy to what we're doing if we can provide some proof that interventions are ethical and have a degree of effectiveness, and whether or not they work for each specific client that we're working with. There's evidence to these that are worth exploring. And our text explores the concept of pluralism as well as an alternative to the single theory or theoretical integration, and to get more of an open approach to working with clients to get a different perspective of emerging theoretical models. So, pluralism suggests that multiple approaches might be appropriate for a single client and gives a therapist the opportunity to assess which model is the best fit for each person. So, pluralism is the underpinning of theory that supports using an eclectic or integrated approach. So, as you start to develop your own approach and your own style in counseling work, it's important to understand what are the goals of the psychotherapeutic interventions and what client variables might impact these goals. So, thinking about what might be some of the key factors that are bringing people into counseling. What should the focus of the psychotherapeutic intervention be? And how is the way that the client is presenting going to impact the work? So, some of these things that we want to start to recognize in our clients are readiness for change. And what are their supports? What kind of network do they have? What are their presenting symptoms? How severe and to what degree are they experiencing a disruption in their life? And where are they at with motivation? And what kind of support might they need for that? And along with motivation, how are they doing with acceptance of the circumstances as they are? And what kind of defensive operations might the client be exhibiting? What kind of rapport are you able to establish with the client? And what's the willingness like? What's the length of the therapeutic relationship going to be? And how does this client present in terms of their own perseverance and resiliency? What kind of progress are they hoping to make? So, we might be working with clients around stabilization, getting some relief from their symptoms. And stabilization and symptom reduction are often things that will bring people into therapy. And oftentimes, that's not where the work will end, but it can definitely get us a foot in the door. And it might help us build those long term pattern recognition skills that will help them build awareness around their patterns and change patterns if that's their goal. Self exploration is a big part of the work that we might be able to dig into once we get our clients through the hurdle of discomfort and through the stabilization period. And maybe just think of Maslow's hierarchy here. You want to make sure that we're good with physiological and safety needs being met first, and then we can move into belonging, esteem, and self actualization. Always check with them, though, about this and make sure that we're not assuming. I've had clients who have been street homeless who were okay with this part of their lives and really wanted to dig into belongingness needs. And while it seemed to me like we were skipping a step by not focusing on access to food, clean water, safety, to the client, we were right where we needed to be. So it's just kind of a summary of counselor professionalism. And I could certainly go into more detail here. And if you have any questions, let me know. But I think your book really does a great job. And I'm curious if you have any additional ideas or questions that weren't covered. I think counselor professionalism is a huge part of the work that happens in hands on and in internship. And a lot of that work doesn't end when you graduate. As you start your career and even as you move farther down the road, parts of your professional identity might shift and change. So it's good to have these concepts of professionalism and be connected to these goals at all times. And the second chapter of the book, we're talking about the client therapist relationship, which again builds on some of the things that you've already studied in previous courses, but maybe goes a little bit deeper and talks about ways to more deeply create an alliance. And the big thing here is the therapeutic alliance. The therapeutic alliance refers to the strength of the relationship between a therapist and client. And I like to think about the alliance as a multifaceted gem or diamond. And I drew you a little diagram here. Yes, I drew this nerd alert. I just wanted you to see what was going on in my brain. But just consider that the therapeutic alliance is just one component of the relationship, and there are multiple other factors in a relationship other than just the alliance. So, as you can see in my drawing and in the next slide, and if you've read the text, this isn't new information. But what might be missing here? Is there anything that you can think of that isn't listed? And after the alliance, when we look at the therapeutic process as a whole, establishing counselor credibility might be something that happens in the beginning, depending on the organization, depending on how your clients present for treatment. Establishing credibility might be a big part of getting them to participate in the therapeutic relationship at all. Identifying a problem. This doesn't necessarily mean a diagnosis. And if you were with me for the diagnosis class, maybe you caught on to some of my bias about how the diagnosis isn't the end all be all. Though, when you're studying for the NCE, you should probably be viewing diagnosis as very important. And diagnosis can be important for access, it can be important for insurance payments, it can be important for disability claims, forensic cases, medical cases, the list goes on. And I'm not saying diagnosis isn't important. All I'm saying here is that the problem isn't necessarily the diagnosis. The problem is probably one of the first things on a treatment plan that you'll be writing. And these statements are usually best when they're using direct quotes from your client. So if you ask your client in the very first session when you meet them, if you say, "Hey, what brings you in?" Likely they're going to give you some idea of what the problem is and what they're seeking help for. And it's a collaborative effort, right? Maybe they have many problems and you can help them see how they're connected, or maybe some problems are exactly the same, they're just sort of wearing different disguises. But you work together to conceptualize this problem, which leads us into the goal setting process, which is also collaborative. Because the worst thing is for a client to come in and say, "Yeah, my problem is my wife. We're fighting a lot. I think I want to leave her. I'm not sure I can make this marriage work." And from that, you identify the problem as severe alcohol use disorder, and you write a treatment goal around the client being abstinent from alcohol and starting 12-step meetings. Nowhere in the client's statement to you was a drinking problem or a goal. Now, alcohol might be a contributing factor here, and you would want to explore that with the client to see if that was the case or what their goals were around it. But the point being, we don't do this work for the clients, we do it together. You can blow a therapeutic relationship by assuming that you know more about them than they know about themselves, because that is never true. And along with this is meeting client expectations. So asking them, "What do you hope to get out of our time together? What are your expectations of me in this role?" These can be really great questions to make sure that it is collaborative and make sure that there's an understanding from the start that we are not the fixers of problems. That's not our role. We also want to consider developmental needs, be multicultural aware and competent throughout the therapeutic process. These types of things are our responsibility to bring to the relationship. And then helping clients build self advocacy, helping them establish techniques for autonomy and independence. And I'm sure that you've heard this before, but preparation for termination starts in the first session. And we aren't expecting our clients to be in therapy forever. They might be, but ideally, what we're helping our clients do is move to a more independent place. And I always say to my clients at intake and multiple times throughout our time together is that my goal is not to hold people hostage in treatment, but the goal of treatment is to not need treatment anymore. The goal is to be able to establish sustainable change, coping skills, social support, whatever their goal is, enough externally from the therapy so that they don't need me anymore. I work to put myself out of a job. And if you work with that mindset too, termination will always be at the forefront of your mind in a good way. So, when we start to think more deeply about the therapeutic relationship, we think about the parties involved. There's this three component model of counseling where we consider the existing factors between clients and counselors. And there's these things that we're bringing into the counseling relationship, kind of the inherent things about us, like race, sex, physiological, psychological characteristics, multicultural backgrounds. And so, when we think of the ways paradigm that I hope that you're growing to love, it's the way of being. Who are you? What do you bring to the table? What's your it factor? And the counseling process is another component to this. So that might be equivalent to the way of intervening in the ways paradigm. So, thinking about how do we explain these things to clients? How do we set the stage for that to build healthy therapeutic relationships that are also effective, right? Because we can have a really good relationship without being effective, and then we're just friends. We're not their counselor anymore, which is not professional and not ethical. So, thinking about process, what is most critical? And the process always begins with establishing that relationship. With some clients, it'll be easier than others to establish rapport and build that therapeutic relationship and alliance. And with other clients, it might take a little bit more time, to establish what the counseling process is going to be and what is the intended outcome. And so there's this really cool statistic, at least I think it's cool, that Sexton and Whitson reported that 50% of the benefit of counseling occurred within the first 6 months of weekly sessions. And that, of course, was contingent on client engagement, their own problem solving attitude, and mastery of situations. But 50%, oh, that's a lot. And so, as we talk about our approaches and the process and the outcome will definitely depend on our individual clients' needs or the reasons why they're coming to therapy and what they understand about themselves. So, how do we help them understand more deeply so that they can better assess what those outcomes should be? This might even look like an initial goal of therapy being an insight building goal or a goal to make a goal. So there's these 18 therapeutic characteristics, and this is a great place to start thinking about and summarizing what you're working with. So this might fit into your way of being. Sometimes it might even fit in with your way of understanding or your way of intervening, but it's a good little list. And I think it's a hard concept when you start your field work and practicum. It's sort of difficult to take an inventory of everything that's going on at any given moment. But when you're moving into internship or even advanced practice, it might be nice to have something like this to look at. And so some of these lists can be helpful to start to organize your thoughts. You could narrow your focus and sharpen your skills a little bit in one area and then move on to the next. But hopefully, at your sites, as you're moving into internship, you're getting a little bit more autonomy in the work that you're doing with your clients. So you might be able to focus on these a bit more. And our text also gives us this really great list of therapeutic interventions. So this can be a nice list to refer to as well. And these are just some categories for interventions that might encompass a multitude of different actual models or theories and what their approaches might recommend. So thinking about just what are some of the bigger ideas of these interventions? So how might any of these apply to any specific client? And then what does it mean with whatever theory or integration of theories that you're working with? So, for example, therapist self disclosure is seen wildly different across theories. Some say none, under no circumstances whatsoever should you ever self disclose. Some are a little looser, and some rely on it, maybe even to the extreme. So, what does your specific approach have to say about it? When and why and how might we use self disclosure with intentionality and for the client's benefit? This answer is going to differ for everyone, and that is great. But we want to make sure that first and foremost, we're doing it with the intention of helping the client. So you take all these concepts and search your models for their answers of how to handle these interventions. Again, no one right way here, but mind you, there are plenty of wrong ways. So just be careful of that. And we can't practice from an unethical, unprofessional place and then turn around and point at our model and say, well, it's okay because our model didn't tell us not to do that thing. And just because I pulled self disclosure as an example, I'm going to link a video in the module below that I think is really helpful, regardless of which model you're working from. So maybe just take a peek at that if you're really interested in this intervention, you want to learn more. 6 factors in therapeutic processes. And so these are interesting because they're shared and crossing over despite different theoretical orientations, just like our interventions that we talked about in the last slide. And so these are really important factors that stand out that you'll definitely see as you work with clients. So the development of insight and just our awareness of our clients' insight and where they are in that developmental timeline. The experience of catharsis, right? So, reality testing, these are just some types of things that sound more common to some theoretical models, but these are generally agreed upon mostly across the board, no matter what model you're working from. And then there's the concept of hope, disclosure from either side, and identification. So, these are therapeutic processes that we'll see regardless of the model that we're working from. So, get familiar with these. And then hopefully many of you are having the opportunity to experience group in your internship or in your practicum or in your work with clients. And group has a lot of characteristics that are really interesting. And if you know me, you know I love group therapy. And I think there's something really magical about it. There is so much happening at any one time. So thinking about just the vicarious learning process, which I think in and of itself is magical, being able to observe others and you as the facilitator modeling connection. So it can be really therapeutically beneficial to people who might not engage really well in the individual session dynamic. And maybe what they're missing is this vicarious learning opportunity. And I've seen a lot of clients get so much benefit out of group, and that starts to cross over in their individual therapeutic work. And I know you're all taking or will take or have taken a groups class, so I'll try to limit myself on singing its praises. But I just want to talk about some other points here on this slide. So, role flexibility is giving clients a little bit more openness to fit themselves into the therapy process because there's a whole group to consider now instead of thinking of an individual session where it's just you and the other person. So, being able to shift between being a helper and a help seeker is what this role flexibility is getting at. And that's a big part of group, is being able to offer feedback from a peer perspective. So usually in a group, the group members have some kind of shared experience that unites them. And when you're planning a group, whether it's opened or closed, you want to make sure that the participants have something in common. We can't just start a group because we think these 5 clients will get along really well. Again, working with intentionality and purpose of the group will come from the shared goals or shared experiences that those group members have. And that creates a link to universality. Being in the same boat with other people, sometimes just being able to connect, knowing that you're not alone in these experiences can have a lot of therapeutic benefit and can set the stage for more authentic engagement and interaction in therapy. And this can be especially helpful to take the therapist out of the self disclosure role because the group members will fill that role now. And it can give some really great power to clients to be heard and be seen in their experiences. And also consider the power that comes from being vulnerable in a room, asking for help from others. It's really magical stuff. Altruism is being able to offer support unselfishly. And this is something that happens a lot, even from clients we don't expect to see it from in the group process, because there are some of these different connections happening in the group experience that you might not be able to plan or account for. And clients are being able to offer space to others. Having the focus taken off of themselves can be really helpful for a number of reasons. And sometimes in the group process, there can be these family reenactment experiences where clients have the opportunity to rework conflict or attachment wounds, attachment styles that they may be having with people outside in their normal everyday lives, likely born from their family of origin and maybe even repeating in their current family dynamic. So you might be seeing this expressed in group with peers, and it's really interesting stuff to pay attention to. I had a client that would talk about how her family never seems very present. They don't understand her. They don't even offer to help. And then I observed her over the span of weeks in an IOP, just taking a back seat to much of the group process, accommodating others instead of advocating for her own needs to be met. We had an individual session where I shared my observation and I asked her if her interaction in the group was reflective of her experiences at home, and she said yes. So we started experimenting in the group that was a safe space for her. Um, what it might feel like to take up a bit more space, speak louder, advocate for her needs instead of agreeing with others' ideas, setting boundaries, just stating needs outright and letting other people adjust around her. And so we started by talking to the group about what she was going to be doing with this experimentation phase. And the group was so lovely and so supportive and started cheerleading her when they observed her trying something differently in the group process. And she was able to practice these skills in a safe bubble. She participated in self disclosure. So she talked about herself and her feelings with attention to personal meanings in the here and now. So, meaning that if she set a boundary with a peer and group, either she would naturally, or as a facilitator, I might prompt her to explore out loud what it felt like for her in the moment to set that boundary. What data can she gather from her feelings about setting boundaries? And just because it was uncomfortable didn't make it wrong. So we had a lot of practice working through the discomfort of trying something new. And because she was sharing all this here and now observation of her process, other group members were on board with all of it. Even if they didn't want to be told no, they wanted her to practice saying no to them. It was just really beautiful work. And so then once she felt like she had mastered these skills in group, guess what? She took them home with her and started doing them with her family members. And she would come back to the group and talk about her successes in changing that family dynamic that was really starting to harm her. And so before group, she wasn't even aware that she was playing a role in the dynamic that she hated so much. People have so much room to gain insight in a group setting. And then last on this list is the magic of interpersonal learning. So, social skills, being able to view and reflect on new behaviors. And just that, again, the experience of receiving support. And if you've ever been in a group and experienced those cathartic experiences shared by members or witnessed by others for one person, can just be really powerful stuff. So these are some factors unique to the group process, and you might be able to think of even more after being in groups or facilitating groups for a while. If you haven't ever had the opportunity to do group work, I highly recommend it. Even just go shadow one at your site if it's available to you. Just a little bit of experience will help you see all the magic at play and what a unique experience it truly is. And for some populations of clients, group therapy is highly recommended. Consider any population that tends towards isolation as a symptom of their diagnosis or as a symptom of their problem. People with substance use disorders, people with sex offenses. Group can be even more magical when you add the aspect of community and belonging, right? So we're starting to tie a thread back to Maslow's hierarchy. So I'll just keep it moving. So after chapter 2, we skipped a few. Your assigned readings were to jump ahead to chapter 9. And this is where our book talks about person-centered techniques and psychoeducational counseling approaches. And the reason to do all of these together is so that we can talk about how person-centered approaches have become the accepted and understood way of being for a lot of counselors. Many counselors see it as their foundation, not necessarily in interventions, but more so in how they are in the room with a client. And in the grand scheme of counseling history, person-centered and psychoeducational approaches are fairly new, but also both generally accepted as truth in the counseling community, as in we should be able to work this way. Many of the more contemporary approaches assume that you have a person-centered foundation, and then they'll build from there. So you might want to think about those core foundational concepts: unconditional positive regard, empathy, genuineness, active reflective listening, paraphrasing, clarifying responses, that non-judgmental, honest, supportive feedback that's happening in the here and now, the present moment, congruence or that transparency with the client of, I like to really call that too, of like, whoever I am in the counseling room is the same as who I am at home, is the same as who I am as an educator, is the same as who I am as an artist. It's just me. I am congruent across all aspects. I'm not putting on different hats and being a different person as I'm entering a room. You just get Jen. You don't get Jen as a counselor and Jen as a teacher. I'm just Jen. And then finally, listening for feeling. Really important here. So that wraps up our lecture for today, going over chapters 1, 2, and then just the beginning of 9. There's going to be videos linked below for you to explore even more about chapter 9 and person-centered techniques. I really want you to watch those. I really want you to consider what they mean to you as a counselor. And then next week, we'll move on and explore some different interventions. Let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to comment on this. I'm really excited to hear some of your thoughts to these questions I've been asking. Thanks for your time.